Located at the southernmost tip of Lake Muskoka, the waterfront area of West Gravenhurst has always been a busy place. Today it's a popular destination for both tourists and residents, featuring a variety of shops, restaurants, and recreational facilities. For most of its history, however, activity in the area tended to be more industrial. In early years, several sawmills operated here. Then it became the headquarters of the Muskoka steamship fleet, then the home of two famous boat manufacturers. And during most of that time, the railway station at the wharf was extremely busy, at least during the summer months. The landscape here has changed so much over the years that someone who knew it a century ago might have a hard time recognizing the place. But we can still remember how it used to be. The main attraction of the Muskoka Wharf is undoubtedly the steamship Seguin and its sister ship Winona II. Thousands of visitors have enjoyed a nostalgic cruise on the lakes on these vessels. Seguin is an authentic 19th century steamboat which began its career on the Muskoka Lakes over 130 years ago. After the steamship service stopped in the late 1950s, Seguin spent a decade as a floating museum, then another decade undergoing a complete restoration before it resumed regular cruises in the summer of 1981. In this 1971 photo, we see a rather lonely-looking Seguin tied up at the dock with little else around. Winona II, a new-build ship that entered service in 2002, was designed to resemble the steamships of the past, but it is diesel-powered and almost entirely constructed of metal, features that make it easier to operate and maintain. Some visitors may be surprised to learn that the wharf here, where the cruise boats are docked, isn't really the Muskoka Wharf. That lies on the other side of the bay. In the past, this wharf was usually referred to as the Town or Gravenhurst dock, or sometimes the Government dock. Although it is the only wharf on the waterfront today that's large enough to accommodate the steamships, it is not the first or even the biggest on the bay. The current version of this dock, which replaced an earlier wooden structure, dates back to 1960. It is made of concrete and offers water and electrical connections. Close by is the building that houses the ticket office for the cruises. There's also a souvenir and gift shop inside, and Muskoka Steamships has its business offices here. First opened in 1992, the building was modeled on the railway station at the Muskoka Wharf, as you can see from this old postcard photo. A year later, this rear section was added to the building, which was used as a museum of steamboats and local history, taking over the role that Seguin had itself performed before it was restored. After the Discovery Center was built, the artifacts and materials from this museum were transferred over there, and this building was put to other uses. Most recently, it has served as the workshop for the Heritage Boatworks, a group of volunteers that takes on various restoration projects, including repair work on Seguin. Most of the buildings that you see on the waterfront today date back to the last major redevelopment, which was officially opened in 2006. A focal point of the Muskoka Wharf project is this open area that provides plenty of space for large public events. It's also a good place to come if you're looking for a little shade, or just to get your bearings. In 2016, it was renamed A.P. Coburn Square as a tribute to the man who founded the Muskoka Navigation Company and managed it for nearly 40 years. Also a member of Parliament for this riding, Coburn played an essential role in making it easier to travel around Muskoka and encouraging people to come here. Further back from the water is the Alliance Pavilion, a somewhat older structure that dates back to 1993. The pavilion was the result of intense community fundraising and participation, and was built entirely through donations of money, materials, and labor. It's also a great place for group events, especially since it gives people some shelter from the sun and rain. Home to a variety of small vendors, this building is appropriately named because the Muskoka Navigation Company's shipyards covered most of this area, including Coburn Square. The first wharf on the bay was located here, more or less in the same place as the existing dock. It was built in 1867 for use by Coburn's first steamboat, Winona. Later, more docks and some maintenance sheds were added to the shipyards, as well as a marine railway that could haul the boats out of the water for dry dock repair. This shipyard was the home base for the Navco fleet, which at its peak consisted of 9 boats. During the summer, many were stationed at various towns around the lakes, so it didn't get too crowded here, but they all returned to Gravenhurst at the end of the season to spend the winter. This photo, taken about 1961, shows the shipyards after the demise of the steamship business, when only Sagamo and Sequin remained. By this time, the old maintenance sheds had been removed, and 2 new metal buildings were constructed to provide marine services. The shipyard's property ended about here, where the current boardwalk turns the corner and continues up the shore. This was where Sagamo, the Muskoka fleet's largest ship, was usually docked. In January of 1969, a fire almost completely destroyed Sagamo, leaving only the burnt-out hull. In this photo, the blue historical marker commemorating the Muskoka steamships can be seen beside Sagamo's hull. Today, the sign can still be seen in pretty much the same location. Further up the shoreline, we come to this pair of popular restaurants, which are built out over the water and offer an excellent view of the bay. If you turn and look inland from this spot and into the past, you would find yourself directly in front of the Gravette Boat Factory, which first opened in 1931. To the left is a large ridge of Muskoka granite that is a helpful landmark. At the foot of that rock, a peculiar trio of concrete silos stood for many years. These were built during the First World War to store potash. Just to the right of the ridge was the Gravette Factory, as seen in this photo. At the time, the road here ran right along the shore, where the parking lot is today, while the factory sat where the road is now. Behind the factory you can see the railway line to the wharf, now a hiking trail, and between them the area that is now the events field and its parking lot. On the shoreline, Gravette's had a large boathouse, and there were railway tracks to move boats from the factory to the lake. That boathouse would have been in almost the same place as this one restaurant, and almost the same size. The Gravette Factory continued in operation until 1978, then was torn down in 1987. In this aerial photo, taken I believe sometime around 1950, we get a good overview of the east side of the bay, including the town wharf, the shipyards, the silos, the Gravette Factory, and its boathouse. Continuing along the boardwalk, there are several more buildings that house a variety of shops and restaurants. These are all fairly recent, part of the 2006 redevelopment project. In the midst of these is a small wetlands habitat area, and if you stop on the bridge for a look, you can usually spot some wildlife, often ducks or a heron. Before the waterfront redevelopment, there were a number of boathouses along this stretch, but they were all removed, and today the shoreline is unobstructed except for the large docks. Almost all of the newer buildings are set back further on the land. Next we come to the boat rental shop, the only one now on the bay. Unfortunately, you can't rent a Streamliner or some other Muskoka-built mahogany boat here, but there are plenty of others to choose from. We're now coming up to the Muskoka Discovery Center, which opened in 2006 and replaced the previous steamship museum. It is much larger, of course, and they are even in the process of adding a new section. If you are interested in classic wooden boats, this is the place to visit, since there are always some on display in the Grace and Speed boathouse here. The Discovery Center has exhibits on Muskoka history, the environment, and many other topics. I would definitely recommend a visit, especially if you would like to learn a little more about the topics that I've just touched on here. Looking to the south, you can see 2 high-rise condo buildings not far away, another element of the recent waterfront project. The condos, along with their parking lots and other facilities, occupy a sizable parcel of land between Steamship Bay Road and Muskoka Road 169. 100 years ago, that area was part of the Mickle Diamond sawmill operation. In this map from 1925, you can see that a huge swath of land was covered with railway sidings, an area that extended well beyond the condo property toward the point where the mill was located, here on the left. Piled alongside the tracks were stacks of lumber waiting to be loaded onto railway cars and hauled away. The Mickle Diamond Mill was the largest in Gravenhurst and the last to close in 1926. Just north of the Discovery Center is the Residence Inn by Marriott. Built a little later than most of the buildings around here, this hotel opened in 2009. It occupies part of the land that was once home to the Ditchburn Boats Factory, while most of that area is now a parking lot. Standing on the west side of the lot, opposite the hotel, in the past you would have been looking directly at the main factory building. The first Ditchburn boat shop at this location was a wooden structure, but it burnt down after only a few years and was replaced by a brick building in 1915. The factory was expanded and eventually stretched right across this narrow neck of land, as seen in this aerial photo. Before building the large factory, Ditchburn had been making boats at a much smaller shop at the foot of the wharf. Financial pressures during the Great Depression finally forced Ditchburn Boats to close in 1938, but the factory was later repurposed and some of the buildings actually survived until the early 2000s, when the land was finally cleared for redevelopment. In the bay to the west, there's now a small marina, built as part of the recent development. This location is also significant because it is the final resting place of the steamship Sagamo. It is not very noticeable, although there is a sign nearby to commemorate it. After it burned, Sagamo's hull was kept at the wharf for over a decade in the hope that it could be restored, but this idea was finally abandoned and the hull was sunk along the shoreline here and buried. From the right position you can see a piece of steel protruding from the shore, all that is left of the biggest boat that ever sailed in Muskoka. Finally, we come to the original Muskoka Wharf, a large pier that for many years was the connection point between the railroad and the Muskoka steamships. In a fairly seamless operation, travelers coming from the south would transfer here from the trains to the steamships, which would then carry them up the lakes to the hotels and cottages that were their ultimate destination. Today there's a public boat launch at the foot of the old wharf that is a popular spot for people to transfer their boats into the water. In the past, this was the location of Ditchburn's first shop in Gravenhurst, opened in about 1890, mainly as a place for people to rent small boats. Before long they added a workshop and began making their boats here. In this photo, the Ditchburn shop can be seen on the right side. And in this next shot, taken from the opposite end of the wharf, Ditchburn's shop is even clearer. The Muskoka Wharf was completed in 1875, the year that the railroad was first extended to Gravenhurst. It measures about 150 meters or 500 feet in length, at least on the longer side, which is where the steamships docked. 3 of them could line up along the wharf at one time. When the trains arrived, hundreds of people would swarm across the platform to the boats, or vice versa when they were going home. The station or ticket office was located near the shore end, and a canopy ran down the wharf to provide waiting passengers with some shelter. The building seen in most pictures of the wharf was actually the second version, built in 1896 after the first was destroyed by fire. It was larger and fancier than the typical seasonal train station, but it was also one of the busiest. Looking at the wharf today, with its dirt road and grass, it's easy to be fooled into thinking that this is a natural feature, not a pier constructed of stout timbers and supported by stone-filled cribbing. Having lasted almost a century and a half, it must have been well built. Because of its purpose, it was designed to support a lot of weight. With 3 main rail lines running along it, this meant that at busy times there could be 3 trains sitting on the wharf side by side, each with 4 to 6 cars. An enormous amount of iron, not to mention the passengers and their baggage. 1953 was the last year of railway service to the Muskoka Wharf. At the end of the 1958 season, the steamship business also closed down, and soon after that the ticket office was demolished. In the 1960s, the wharf found a new use when these tin boathouses, over 50 of them, were built along its sides. These boathouses, which could be considered micro-cottages, are prized getaway spots for their owners in the summertime. While times have changed and the Gravenhurst waterfront looks much different today than it once did, what hasn't changed over the years is the lure of the Muskoka lakes and the fact that people enjoy being on and around the water. These things seem to be timeless. And Seguin too. Seguin has hardly changed at all.